Alaikum. Hello, everyone. I hope you're all having a wonderful day. I'm Luqman Siddiq, and I'm the coordinator of Alfaisal MedHub under the International Office at Alfaisal University, Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. I'd like to welcome you all to yet another exciting webinar under the Career Guidance Series UK. For those of you who don't know what Alfaisal MedHub is, it's an initiative under the umbrella of the International Office College of Medicine that aims at creating an online global community of medical students. Alfaisal MedHub covers a broad range of topics that are common to medical students all around the world. Our primary objective here at Alfaisal MedHub is to help medical students learn more about the career opportunities available after graduating, as well as the steps involved in pursuing them. Since medical students are always confused about the path that's ahead of them, Alfaisal MedHub's Career Guidance Series addresses this challenge from the perspective of accomplished and experienced seniors. As you all are aware, we are now conducting the Career Guidance Series UK for all medical students, and this is in partnership with AMBOSS. We're excited to introduce you to Dr. Mohammed Salik, who will be delivering the 6th webinar under the Career Guidance Series UK, titled Acing the UK Board Exams. Dr. Mohammed Salik is a recent graduate of the College of Medicine, Alfaisal University. He's currently pursuing the UK specialty training pathway. He has successfully cleared his UK board exams, the PLABs and the MRCPs with top scores. He's known for his style of delivering information in a simple and effective way. Thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Salik. We are really looking forward to this webinar.
Thank you, Luqman, for the wonderful introduction. So I hope you guys can see me. Hello, everyone. Assalamu alaikum. So today we're going to be talking about the UK board exams, inshallah. So everyone can see and hear me clearly?
Yes, Doctor.
Okay, so let's dive right to it. So it's going to be really short and straightforward, inshallah. Nothing complicated. Let's try. Okay, so the outline. So main emphasis, of course, would be on the PLAB exams, which are PLAB 1 and PLAB 2. So we'll be discussing what is PLAB 1, what is the exam format, how to prepare, and then finally I'll give you what I think should be the ideal plan. Similarly, we'll do the same exercise for PLAB 2 exam. What is it? What is the format? And then what's the ideal way to prepare? And of course, we'll not go into too much details, because I understand you have been through 5 lectures before this, so you kind of understand what are these different terms and everything. So again, if you haven't, and if you feel that I'm going too fast, you could always feel free to stop me, and then I'll be happy to answer your questions. So, and then finally, in the end, I'll touch base on the Royal College exams. So what are the MRCPs, MRCS, and MRCEM? So I'll just give you a good overview what they stand for, and it's really good news for those especially waiting for the exam dates, because I heard they recently released the dates, and then the dates are booked till like August next year. So that's quite a lot of time, and if you can plan well, and if you want to make best use of your time, you could do a lot of things in between, which we'll discuss today, inshallah, hopefully. So hopefully you guys benefit, and let's get started from PLAB 1. So quickly, what is PLAB 1? It's basically a licensing exam for any international medical graduate wanting to practice in the UK. So, which basically means they just want to check that you are a safe doctor, and before they give you full license to practice, there's something called GMC full license to practice. So that would, once you clear your PLAB exams, you would get the full license to practice, which means you can apply anywhere in the UK for a job. Now, remember, it is a license to practice in the UK. So the questions which are in part of the PLAB 1 would be related to current best practice within the UK. So all the drugs and the equipments and stuff which are routinely available in the UK. So you would find, certain places, especially those who are also studying USMLEs and stuff, you would find there are certain differences, especially like certain huge differences. That's just to do with funding and availability within the UK NHS system. So that's why it's important to keep those in mind, especially note them down, because we are used to answering something in a certain way in the US or even the SMLE exams. But when it comes to the UK and the PLAB exams, they want you to answer how would you do it in the UK. So there are 3 big guidelines which they follow here, which is one of them is the NICE guidelines, so National Institute of Health and Care Excellence. And then there's a shorter version of it, which is called CKS, which is just summary of these nice guidelines. So if you're stuck somewhere, or I would just highly recommend, especially the common conditions like asthma, COPD, heart failure, hypertension. So these guidelines, you should at least see them once from the CKS and see how they flow and what are the first step, what is the second step, just to give you a good idea. And then you have, sometimes they also use sign guidelines, which are from Scotland. So it's very important to keep in mind, it is the UK guidelines, which you need to focus on. And then what the exam basically tests is that within the UK, as you have probably heard, that there are 2 foundation years, so FY1 and FY2. So they're testing knowledge equivalent to end of FY1. So the trainees which are about to go into FY2, that's the knowledge they're expecting from us. So that's also when they get the full license. So within UK, how it works is that when you are when you graduate in medical school, you get something called provisional license, and then you practice for 1 year, or you do your FY 1 year. And then once you successfully complete your FY 1 year, you get a full license to practice. So basically, so that's the level they want to check. So they would ask you like acute things, common things, and important things. So just keep in mind, so it won't be specific. So it could be from every subject. So it could be medicine, it could be obs and gynae, it could be pediatrics. So it is a really broad exam, a really vague exam. But once you get to question banks and you would know, there are certain things they like to highlight and they like to focus on, then we would also hone in on these conditions. So it's basically like you need to know a little bit of everything, and they don't expect you to go in depth, like, what's the second line of this, but you should have, a general idea of acute and common. So you need to know a little bit of everything. And there's something called the blueprint, which is also available on the GMC website, which basically lists down what are the things they expect you to know, which I found, like I personally did not find very helpful. It was very vague and broad. But if you guys want, you can just, before you start preparing, you can just have a look at the blueprint and see what they want you to, what are they expecting you and what are they going to test you on. So that is about PLAB 1 in a nutshell. Now, what the exam itself is like. So exam is basically MCQs. So you have 180 MCQs with 5 options. So it's best of 5, and you have a total of 3 hours. So you have exactly 180 minutes. So which, if you do the math, you would have 1 minute per question. So it might sound okay for some people, because you remember we are used to, USMLE, we have like longer questions. The questions in the PLABs are shorter, but still, trust me, the time is a big issue. So even if you're a fast reader, I would still highly recommend to take the timing very seriously, especially within the last month of your preparation when you're doing mocks. The biggest challenge is to transfer the paper. So this 1 minute per question also includes, because it's a paper-based exam, it's not a computer-based exam. So you would have something like this. So you need to transfer it onto this. So when you select your question or whatever you answer, then you need to shade the appropriate box. So this can, take some time, can take 5, 10, 15 seconds off. So essentially you might have, sometimes 50 seconds per question. So it can get really tight. And especially, let's say you get one question, which is a little bit longer, and then you spent like 4 or 5 minutes on it. Basically, you're taking time from the questions which you could solve later down the road. So it's really important not to get stuck on one question. Really important to keep timing in mind. I would like, it was just one thing if other seniors told me before I gave the PLAB, which would be the timing. It wasn't emphasized enough. So that's why I'm trying to emphasize it here. So even though you might seem like you're a fast reader, you're a native speaker, but still you need to, so when they say start, you need to be at your full speed from the beginning. So if you take a little slowly, so what happened with me personally, so I was on what question, at the end of 1 hour, which is 60 minutes, I was at question 40, 45. So you could see I was lagging behind 15 points. And then that's when I thought, okay, this is getting really tight. So then I went into full speed, and then I managed to complete it 5 minutes before the time up. But still, timing is really important. You can't let it slip. From the get-go, you need to be on your full flow. So that's one. And it's paper-based exam, so you need to practice your transferring skills. So I would recommend printing out these, answer sheets. And then when you're solving the question on the laptop or when you're doing your mock exams, just shade it in. So, you get this habit of shading, and then you could adjust your timing accordingly. So that's one. And of course, you won't have any breaks in between. So it will be solid 3-hour block. So just be prepared in advance. So that's the important thing about timing. Second exam happens 4 times a year, which you guys already know by now. I think they release already seats till August next year already. There's, of course, really high demand and very limited availability of seats. And eligibility, again, as probably previously discussed, that you need to pass your final exams and you need evidence of English language before you are eligible to sit for the exams. And booking is done via online portal called GMC Online. You could just go there and it's really straightforward, just follow the instructions. So that's about PLAB 1 overview of the exam, how it works. This we already saw. Now comes the questions, how should we prepare? Now, I would recommend everyone, first thing, you should go to the GMC website, and then there's something called sample questions for PLAB 1. So there are about 30 questions. So I would suggest you start from there and solve them and see how they're asking the questions, what are their styles, how big are the questions, how are the options. And then you would just get a really good idea of how, because it's it's really different from the USMLE styles, which we are used to probably. So I would say PLAB 1 is similar to SMLE style. If you guys have, I'm not sure if you guys done SMLE. So it's quite similar to SMLE, but it's just a bit of higher standard. So better English and better quality of questions than SMLE. But again, the question stems are not that big. So try out the sample questions and then you would see for yourself how to go about it. And then second, as usual, QBanks. So QBanks are your best friend. Now the highly recommended one, which I think is a must, everyone should do, is PLABABLE. So PLABABLE is just a QBank created by some of the physicians working here in the UK. And what they do is they collected some of the questions from the previous exams, and then they created some of their own questions, but their questions are really nice. But the best thing is their explanations. So the explanations are really well written, and they have links to the appropriate guidelines if you want to read more. So they would always tell you this is from the nice guideline from this page. And so it was really nice. So PLABABLE, I think, has around 3,000 questions. And so it's a really must-have resource for your PLAB 1. And then there are other QBanks like Med-Revesions, and then there's something called 1700 questions by Dr. Khalid, which I think is an outdated source. So when I was preparing maybe 1 or 2 years ago, people were studying from this still. But I would say these 1700 questions are actually within the PLABABLE. So no need. So these 1700 questions are actually also collected by someone called Dr. Khalid. So he collected some of the commonly repeated questions, but I would say most of them is also repeated within the PLAB. So if you just do the PLABABLE one, that should be more than enough. You don't need to do anything else. And then there's something called Med-Revesions. I'll talk about it in a minute. And then there's something called notes for PLAB 1. You have PLAB 1 Keys, which is a company which has notes. And then there are PLAB Words. We'll talk about these in a minute. So let's take them one by one. PLABABLE, they're really cheap. First thing, compared to the US QBanks, the UWorld and stuff. So for 3 months, you can get it for around 100 riyals. And if you want the 5-month subscription, you can get it for 120. And then there's something called optional gems, PLABABLE gems. Basically, they are flashcards. So they have for each topic, they collected all the high-yield information and they created flashcards out of them, or very small bullet points. They are really important for, really good for quick review near the end when you're finishing the QBank. If you want, you could buy it directly from them. But if you also want, you could, search online, probably on some groups, you would find, PDF versions of these gems, which you can get for free and maybe have a look at it first. How are they? If it suits your style, then maybe if you want, you can pay and get the gems. Then, as I said, it has around 3,000 questions. So each question, so how it works is they're divided into categories. So you have anatomy, you have, let's say, general surgery, you have palliative medicine. So these categories, within them, you have certain questions. But the problem here is not the problem, but the important thing to keep in mind is that you can only solve the questions once. So if you just solve the question once, you cannot, reset the QBank and solve it again. So that's not allowed. So you would probably have to pay the subscription again, but it's enough. So what will happen is you would solve the questions one by subject wise. So you'll finish all the categories, and then there's an option to do something called mocks. So once you finish all the questions subject wise, once. So that's your first pass. Now in the second pass, what I would recommend is do something called mocks. So what is mocks? So mocks is basically taking the same 3,000 questions which you already solved. Now what they will do, they'll just mix them. So it's similar to what you call random questions in the USMLE question bank. So they will randomize the questions and then they will give you 180 questions. So that's called the mock. So basically a mock exam. So they would just give you 180 questions from different categories. So that's mock 1, mock 2, mock 3. So you could have, you could have 15 to 18 mocks. So this is the way you could solve them again. So you solve them once via categories, just individually study them. And then there's a way to do them via mocks. You could solve the exact 3,000 questions again in a mock style fashion. So that's second thing, mocks. Third thing is something called the big mock. Now the big mock basically is that near each exam, they release something called a big mock, which they create. Half of them, I would say, are repeated from the QBank, but the other half is, new and random, which they create their own. So it's also, I think you get to pay for it. I think that's around 15 to 20 pounds. I can't remember exactly, but there's one big mock optional for you if you want to practice more, if you want to practice your timing. You could always opt for that big mock to get that additional practice and the feel of solving new questions. And what else? So we talked about the categories, we talked about mocks, big mocks, and also for big mocks, honestly, if you can search online, you could find the mocks from big mocks from the previous versions, maybe slightly older, 3 months or 6 months older. You could solve them and they would be available for free. So you can get PDF versions if you want without even having to pay for them. So you could do the big mocks offline, kind of, which is near your exam. So yeah, so you will have one pass through categories, you will have second pass through your mocks, and then third, if you want additional practice, you will have big mocks. Now, ideally, to set a study plan would be really difficult because it depends, it's very subjective, varies from person to person. But I would say for average, student, 3 months should be more than enough for the QBank. So as I laid it out, so if you solve 50 questions a day, that would take you around 60 days to finish the whole QBank. So that's about 2 months. And then your third month, what you could do is you could review your mistakes. You could do the PLABABLE mocks. As I said, you could do your second pass. You could do the big mocks. And of course, you could do the gems for review. So 3 months is a really good ballpark figure to keep in mind. But of course, this can be all done in 1 month. If you can study well, and if you have done your USMLEs, if you have done your SMLEs, of course, so things can shift. And if someone hasn't done anything, 3 months might be, too tight for him. So it can go up to 6 months. So this is just a rough average, which I laid out there, and it's really subjective and varies from person to person. So that's the PLABABLE. Now, for some students who are like, oh no, I did PLABABLE, but I still don't feel confident, or I'm getting a lot of mistakes, or when I'm doing the mocks, my average is not that high. But yeah, also remember, of course, this is just a pass-fail exam, which probably so don't worry about the number of mistakes you make. So your grades basically doesn't matter. So if you get 179 or 180 out of 180 and someone else gets, let's say, 120, you both pass. So they don't discriminate you based on your grading. They don't even look at it. So when you're applying for jobs, you can't tell them, oh, I'm 180 out of 180 in PLAB 1. They won't even look at it. So that's really good. So you don't have to worry about, scoring really high. But of course, 120 is the number you need to keep in mind, which is about 60%. So that's the number you need to pass the exam. So that's for PLAB 1. Yeah, so I was saying, if some people want additional practice and they feel that they're not really confident enough, then they can do something called Med-Revesions. Now, Med-Revesions is another QBank, which is similar to PLAB. Again, you have a lot of questions. So in this one, you will have about up to 4,000 questions. These are for additional practice, and they are very optional. These are just for those, who are like, okay, I have more time, I want to prepare a little slowly. You could, what you could do, if you want, you could start with Med-Revesions and then go to PLABABLE. It's really optional. It's up to you. Let's see, there is a chat. Yes, so Hala is asking what average I should aim for while doing the mocks. Yes, so average, as we said, 60% was the cutoff. So when you're doing the mocks, I would say if you're getting above 75, if you're getting 75 to 80, that's really fair enough. But also keep in mind, depends. Now, because remember mocks, when I told you mocks, they're not actually mocks because you're doing the question second time. So maybe, sometimes the mocks can give you a inflated figure. So even if you get 80, but that's not 80 the first time, you see what I mean? So maybe if you remember the questions, then the percentage in the mocks is really meaningless. So someone could score 100 out of 100, but that's just out of memory, out of remembering, instead of, actually solving them. So that depends. But when you're solving the QBank the first time, so if within categories you're scoring 75 to 80, you're really safe. Above 70, I would say you would be safe. I hope that answers your question. Let's see, there's another question. I'm in second year. In your opinion, when I should? Yeah, second year is really early. I would suggest you should focus on, instead of worrying about the exam, what I would say is you should focus on worrying about your extracurriculars. So if you can get things like research, if you can get things like teaching experience, if you can get, additional things on your CV or just an experience of volunteering or whatnot, and actually focusing on your medical school as well. I think that would be more beneficial because these things you can really take care of them. As I told you, within 2 to 3 months, you could take care of this exam easily. But you won't have time to do these research and other things down the line. So yeah, focus on these things first. Okay. Let's see. So where were we? So yeah, we were on PLABABLE. So now if someone wants additional practice, wants to solve additional questions, he can do Med-Revesions. Similarly, it's similarly priced around $30 for 3 months, and it has more questions for you, and the explanations there would be more extensive. So some of the complaints I found among students when they were preparing, that sometimes PLABABLE doesn't explain well. So it just gives you a few lines. So if your concept's not that strong, you might want to go, as I told you, you might need to refer to NICE, the guidelines, NICE, CKS, or even just online. So you could take care of that way. But if you feel you're consistently going online, maybe, more than half of the questions you don't feel that you understand fully, then maybe there's an option to try Med-Revesions, where you'll have more extensive explanations and, in-depth explanation and notes for each topic. Again, it's really optional. I did not personally use this one, but I've seen other students who are struggling with PLABABLE, they can go to Med-Revesions for extra questions. So that's Med-Revesions, and that's basically summary of PLAB 1. And then there's something called PLAB 1 notes. So what happens is, some people don't like doing questions, so they want something to read before they do the questions. So they were like, no, I can't, if I don't study, how can I, test myself on it? I won't be scoring good. So if you are of those types, you could go and read some notes. So notes, basically, there are 2 companies which provide notes, PLAB 1 Keys and PLAB Verse. So they have written format. So basically, the explanation in the QBanks are converted into written format for those in a small booklet type fashion, PDF booklets. So maybe respiratory would have 70, 80 pages, and they will just have, small bullet points. That's for those who, want to read first and then solve the QBanks. That's one way you want to do it if you want, but I would not recommend that because what that does is that basically ends up spoiling your QBanks. So because the way the questions are framed, if you just learn the text and then end up solving the same questions on the same text, you would be scoring 90s and 100s. And then you would be feeling, oh, I'm learning the material. Maybe you're not actually learning, you're just familiar with the material. So there's a big difference between learning the material and being familiar with it. So I would say start with QBanks, even if it's harsh, maybe it's hard in the beginning, but still the way the QBanks train your mind and the way they reflect the actual PLAB 1, that is more beneficial. And the mistakes you make there actually are not even mistakes. I tell the students to be actually happy when you make a mistake, because what that does is when you make a mistake, the way it wires in your brain is that now you would go back and if you review it properly, you won't forget that information, you see. And if you get something correct, maybe 6 months down the line, you might forget it. The links are not that strong. But if you make something wrong in the QBank, if you get an incorrect question, the link becomes really strong in your brain. So you would notice the mistakes you make in the QBank in the exam, you will not end up making the same mistake. So that's why question-based learning is really, really essential and really, really effective, I believe. But again, if you are one of those types who doesn't like QBanks, you could always start maybe 1 or 2 chapters. You can give it a try. I think there are a few free trials of some subjects like respiratory, cardio. Give it a go, read from there, and then try to do the QBank, and then you would see if there's a difference. If you like it that way, you could do it that way as well. But it's important to remember they won't have any new information. So it's whatever is there in the QBank notes will have kind of the similar information. So it's not like something new they're giving you. And then the gems, which I told you, again, it's just optional. So near the end, gems, you would use it. If you want to use it, you could use it within your last 15 days, just to rapidly review the high yield information if you want. But if you don't prefer, it's fine. You could do it without the gems. So I personally, if you ask me, I did maybe a few chapters from gems. I didn't have much time, but they were really nice, the ones I did. So I was actually thinking back, maybe I should have left more times for the gems, but still, if you want to do gems, they're really nice, but again, depends on the timing. If you have time, do them. If you don't, it's fine. So that is about PLAB 1. So take-home points, just as a recap. Number 1, questions pertain to the UK system. So there are certain things you would see which are different from the US QBanks. Just make a note of them and try to remember them and not make the mistake. Second, do not take the 1 minute per question lightly. So timing is really important. And how would you overcome that is by practicing transferring your answers onto the physical paper. I thought I should have done that. I did not do that. But if you transfer it, I think that should sort of take care of your timing. And thirdly, solving PLABABLE is a must. Now, another thing I want to bring out here is that PLAB 1 exam is similar to SMLE. So those who have done SMLE, they would know that there are certain collections. So what happens is you collect the questions, and those who did the questions before you, they come out and type the questions. Now those collections end up being really nice because they end up repeating this similar concept. You might not get the exact options and everything, but the concept gets repeated. Similarly in PLABs, I did not see like new things. Maybe I would say 60 to 70 to even up to 80% of the information was covered in PLABABLE. So if you can do PLABABLE really nicely, I think you will be guaranteed a pass. So that's why PLABABLE is a must. Okay, that's about PLAB 1. So everything clear so far? Any questions regarding PLAB 1? I guess no questions. So is it too slow, too fast? Please let me know. I can adjust accordingly. All good. Okay, perfect. Yeah, there's a question from Miriam. Regarding the, yes, absolutely. So exactly. So as I told you, PLABABLE will cover that, and then they will give you a link to the guidelines. Sometimes there's a box called external links. You could click on the link and read further if you want. But yes, they will be covered within the QBanks. PLABABLE does a really good job being up to date with the latest guidelines. So you don't need to read each and every single guideline, as I told you, just the ones which are common and which you feel are different from the US system. You can have a look. And like common diseases like asthma, COPD, hypertension, and diabetes, these things should be, top of your head. The rest of the things, PLAB will take care of it. How many mocks would you recommend? Look, mocks, as I told you, the mocks of the PLABABLE itself, I personally maybe did 1 or 2, because what I found was I was remembering the questions. So mocks for me personally were not that useful. Because I knew I have to do it once, so I did it nicely once. I took my time. So if you feel the mocks are beneficial and you're not remembering the question, you could do as many as you like, or you might do 1 or 2. So it depends really. But then there's something called the big mock, which I would at least recommend doing 1, either paid or offline, whichever you get. At least do 1 and try to practice this, doing it manually on a paper, maybe a week before the exam, so you know where you're heading, and hopefully you're heading in the right direction. Okay, so these exams are done. Okay, so these exams, you become eligible to do the exam in your internship year. So once you finish your final year exam, you could log on to your GMC website and you can start looking for dates. But the problem is nowadays, at least the dates are not there, as I told you. So those who will be graduating now, they are getting dates till August next year, which will be after their internship year, or sometimes they would even get November next year. But that's just for now. So if you're in your early years, hopefully by then these things will be sorted, COVID and all, backlog will be gone. So by that time, if you plan it right, just as you finish your fifth year final exams, go to the GMC website and look for the date. You could even get a date, November of the same year, you see. So you could do it in November of your internship year, you could do your PLAB 1, and then maybe 6 months later, you could do your PLAB 2. So within your internship year, if you plan it right, you could finish both of these PLAB exams. Okay, let's see. How long does it need? Yes, Naif, as I told you, it's really subjective, but I gave you a rough guideline, which was 3 months. I gave you a rough outline. Maybe it was in the slides, maybe you missed it. So what I said was PLABABLE has around 3,000 questions. So if you saw 50 questions a day, that should take you around 60 days to finish PLABABLE. And then last month would be for revisions and mocks and other things. So 3 months is a rough guideline, but of course, if your background is strong, if you've done your USMLEs, you can even do them in 1 month. So it really depends from person to person. Okay, should we do both exam? Yes, so PLAB is basically, it's a 2-part exam. So you need to finish both exams to become eligible for GMC registration. So you'll do PLAB 1 and you need to pass PLAB 2, then you will be eligible to get the GMC registration. So both exams are a must. I think that's about it. Okay. Okay, now let's talk about PLAB 2 exam. So PLAB 2, now, as you can see on the picture, now this will be a practical OSCE-based exam. So similar to what OSCE is when we have it in the clerkship year. So those who are in 4th and 5th year, they would know. So it's basically consists of 16 stations. So you have 16 stations and you rotate among them, and they give you 8 minutes per station. And basically, there are 3 main things they're testing, which we'll come to a minute, and it costs around £900. Now, these are the domains they're testing. So they're testing, number 1, data gathering, technical and assessment skill, which basically means your history and physical exam. So these 2 are important. So basic history taking, basic physical examinations like respiratory exam, cardiac exam, abdominal exam. Second, they're testing your management skills. So once you take the history and then the doctor, they won't ask you to pinpoint to a certain pinpoint to a certain diagnosis. They'll just ask you, give me a list of differential diagnosis. Someone presenting with, let's say, blood in the coughing up blood. Okay, they would just go like, okay, can you please give me a differential diagnosis? So you could just list few differential diagnoses of hemoptysis, and then you're good to go. And then they will ask you about basic management plans, so nothing too detailed. And then the most important thing, and the most things which I see people struggling with, is the last bit, which is the IPS, they call it, or interpersonal skills. Now that's basically how you deal with the patient and how you communicate with the patient. And it's really, really different here in the UK compared to back home, back in Saudi. It's completely different. Here, the patient, it's really patient-centered care. So even while doing something like, a small procedure, like getting blood from the patient, you need to explain nicely that what I'm going to do. And then before you even prick the patient, you are going to be like something like, oh, sharp scratch coming, 3, 2, 1, and then you prick the patient. So you need to prepare, you need to communicate, be professional. So these things you will learn with time. So these interpersonal skills are really, really important. So it's nothing to do with your history, nothing to do with your management. Sometimes, if you score really low on your IPS skills, you don't listen to the patient, or if you're asking really closed-ended questions, or if you're sounding robotic, that's really negative. So IPS marks can really hurt you badly. So these are the 3 things they are trying to test. Now there's certain procedural skills they're also testing, which are some of them are really basic, so blood pressure and these things, but some of them are really complex, which we are not used to doing. So back home, what happens in Saudi is for venipuncture or inserting a cannula, it's nurse's job. But here in the UK, the thing is, cannulation and venipuncture is done by the doctors. So ABGs, taking bloods, inserting cannulas are all done by the doctors, especially the junior ones. So that's why they would expect you to know these skills, and they would ask you to perform on a mannequin. So if you just practice once or twice, you should be good to go. So these are just note the things which are different and then try to focus there. That's it. Other things are really basic. So interpreting basic ECGs and X-rays, these are really easy. But then certain things, as we mentioned, like cannula, venipuncture, and these things you need to practice on mannequins. Okay, yeah, this is the part of, so this is the IPS, which is from the GMC website. So as you can see, involving the patient in decision-making, communication with the relatives, breaking bad news. So all these things are done, you know, in really different fashion and really nice fashion here in the UK. So we will, once you know how to prepare for it, you will learn with time. This is really, but it's an important thing to keep in mind. People, you know, focus more on the history and the physical and procedures, and then they always end up neglecting this IPS or the communication part. Now, where can you take the PLAB2? PLAB2 only happens in the Manchester here in the UK. So you have 2 assessment centers within Manchester right next to each other. And the dates, good news, the dates are really good here. So they're really easier to secure because, you know, since it happens in the Manchester and they can accommodate up to 100 students a day. So, and they run like 5 or 6 times a week. So that's why they can accommodate a lot of students. So dates are really easy to secure. So you should expect to get a date about 6 months after your PLAB1 exam. So once you finish your PLAB2, within 6 months, you would get, you know, your PLAB2 date, hopefully. And then with time, hopefully this backlog is going to improve. So by the time those who are in, you know, still junior years, by the time it will get even better, maybe within 2 to 3 months, you would find your PLAB2 date. So now we know what the PLAB2 exam involves. Now let's see how to prepare. Now, first thing again, I would say is to there's something on the website called common errors for PLAB2 exam. So first thing I would suggest, highly recommend, is go read through that so we don't end up making these common errors. So it involves, you know, various things from communication to history and other things. And then have a look at the sample question. So GMC actually provides, similar to PLAB1 sample question, they provide sample stations. Have a look at them and just understand what they expect from you. And especially look at things like which are new. So there's something called drug cards, there's something called IV prescriptions and blood prescriptions, which are very different from what we do back home. So you need to physically fill out prescriptions, physically fill out blood report forms. They're really easy, but you need to understand how they work. And then if you just practice once or twice, you will be good. Now, remember how PLABABLE was the backbone of your PLAB1 preparation. Now the backbone of your PLAB2 preparation is the study partners. Because remember, it's OSCE exam, so it's a communication face-to-face exam. So this exam you cannot do alone. So you need to find, if not one, maybe 2 or 3 study partners to get a really nice different perspective of everyone. So what happens is, when you study with the study partner, is you ask them to be the patient, you be the doctor, right? For certain stations. Then another station, you reverse the role. They be the doctors, you be the patients. So this way you end up learning a lot of things. You might see that things they did differently, and then you could provide feedback to each other. So it's a really nice way of learning. And so it's really important to have study partners for your PLAB2. And then there's a question of academy. So this is a really controversial thing. So what academy basically is they have centers within the UK in different places. So in London, Liverpool, Manchester, they're popular academies. What they do is they provide course for the PLAB2 to prepare. So it's basically 2 weeks, usually 2 weeks of teaching. And the problem with is the cost. As you can see, it's like £500 to £600, and it's really expensive for some people. So imagine coming here, staying 14 days, and then paying £500, £600 just to go to academy. It might become too much. So, and also the objective value of the academy, if you ask me or if you ask other people, is they don't provide much. But what they do is they provide you with study partners. So if you don't have study partners from back home, or if you're struggling to find someone, but imagine if you go to the academy, regardless of what they do there, if it's not good or whatever, but the people you find there are in the same interest. So they are also appearing for PLAB 2. They're from different parts of the world. And if you practice some stations with them, that would give you really, really good preparation, and they will give you really good feedback, and you can really nicely learn. So again, Academy indirectly helps by getting you, the study partners. And of course, they will provide you with mannequins to practice on. They would give you mock exams. They would give you many different things. But for a price of £500 to £600, some people find that, it's controversial. They would be like, is it worth it really to do an academy? So if you see some people pass PLAB 2 without going to academy, and then there are others who go to academy and they still end up failing. So you could see it's not like if you go to academy, you will end up passing for sure. But if you want to do it on your own, you can, with the right study partners, with the right material, you can also pass without joining the academy. Or what happens is sometimes what people do is, especially, if you don't have enough time to come here and live in the UK before the exam, what they do is they come to UK maybe 1 week before the exam. They take online classes, come here, in the last week of academy, they join the academy and, practice the mannequins or, take their mock exams. So you could also do that semi-academy thing. If you don't want to attend the full academy and stay here for like 1 month, you could also, partially use the academy as well. And then there are also, I think, 2 to 3 day passes for academy, where you need to pay like, I think, 50 to 60 pounds, and they will give you 3-day access to do whatever you want. So you could go and access the mannequins and, find people and do your practice with. So that's another way to do it. But if you are okay with 14 days, if you have enough time, if you have money, you could directly join the academy, and then it will take care of rest of the things. Now, the second popular question now is, first was, are academy useful? Now, second is, which academy to join? Now, honestly, each of them will have their own pros and cons. Nothing will be perfect. So there will be something wrong with one, then there will be something wrong with the other. So what I would suggest is just personally join the academy which you feel your group is going to. So if, let's say, a group of friends are going to one academy, you could just go join the same academy. It doesn't matter. It's the content within the academy is the same. It's just your own preparation with the study partners which matters. So if you join any academy, it should be fine. But also sometimes some people have relatives. Let's say if you have relatives within the London, so you could join the common stations. If you have people from Liverpool, you could join, so it depends on the geographic variation as well. So that would, end up saving your accommodation costs and, food and other things. So if you have relatives, you can choose these situations. And if you're, let's say, from Egypt, because Dr. Moussoubi is really popular with Egyptians, so he's actually Egyptian himself. So a lot of Egyptian doctors I see go to Dr. Moussoubi, just they find it beneficial and find their own community there. So these factors basically on choosing the academy is not on quality itself of the academy, it's just other external factors which help you choose the academy. So you don't need to worry a lot about that. Any academy should be fine. Okay, that's PLAB 2. Now, what's the ideal way to approach it? First step, as usual, scope what the format of the exam is, how the exam, what are the sample questions, what are they expecting, what are the stations like. And then I would highly recommend starting with any academy notes. So each academy, what they do is they basically give you notes of stations and how you should approach the stations, or what are the questions you should ask. There are Aspire or many different academies. You could find the notes online. People have shared the PDF versions, and then you would just go through it, just have a first pass, get an overview how the stations are, and what are the things you need to ask. And then this will give you a really nice overview of all the PLAB 2 stations. And then your main important thing is to start practicing a study partner. So once both of you have gone through the first pass of the notes, you just go and start self-practice with each other, doing stations with each other. Or some might prefer joining academy online, not reading the notes. So you could just join the academy online, do the online classes. Or if you want, you could come in person as well, depending on how you want to do it. And then finally, maybe 2 weeks before your exam, I would highly suggest that you give a PLAB 2 mock, similar to the big mock in the PLAB 1. So what would mock do is they would run you through 16 stations, and then they will give you feedback on how you performed. So that's a really important way. And then you could reflect on certain things that, okay, I was not good in communication, I was not good in this procedure or this examination, then you could work on that. So that is, and then you will have PLAB mocks, which are also done online. So you could be sitting anywhere in the world, and then you could do your PLAB mocks online with certain doctors, and they will maybe charge you a nominal fee, and then they could give you a slot for a mock exam online as well. Of course, you won't be doing the practical things and physical exam, but at least you could do the communication, history, ethical, and other scenarios with the online mocks. So that's about PLAB 2. Just in a nutshell, if you have any questions. Okay, let's see. Okay, Nida has a question. Can you please explain more about the 6-month gap between PLAB 1 and 2? Because word is out there that after PLAB 1, you can book within 2 to 3 months, depending. Okay, so your question has multiple parts. So first, let me address the UKMLA, which you said is not starting in 2024. Actually, GMC thought that they would start in 2024, but because of the COVID situation, they have delayed it to 2025. So don't worry, PLABs are going to stay till 2025. So UKMLA would start from 2025. Now, the second part to your question is you could book your PLAB 2 once you, so what happens is, once the PLAB 1 results are released, you would get a pass. So depending if you pass, what happens is automatically the GMC website shows you the seats. So once you pass, on the next moment, within 1 minute, you could book your next seat. Now it depends on when that next seat would be. Now current scenario is now the earliest available seat right now is November. So that's why I gave you, so those who did their exam in Feb, so that's why I gave you this 6-month gap between your PLAB 1 and PLAB 2 exam. But again, with time, hopefully by next year, that gap is going to shrink down. So it might become 2 to 3 months. Yes, hopefully it might become 2 to 3 months. But for now, it's currently at 6 months. I hope that answers all your questions. Okay, perfect. Thank you. No problems. So that's about PLAB 1, PLAB 2. Hopefully it's straightforward. Again, PLAB 2 is also, now if you're asking about the passing marks, so it's also pass-fail exam. So out of 16 to 18 stations, you need to score just about 50. So you need to pass, I think, 10 stations. So you need to you could literally fail 5 to 6 stations and you could still pass your PLAB 2 exam. So that doesn't mean it's easy or take it easy, but that shows you that you have a lot of, margin to play with. And that's the beauty of the UK system. It's not, they don't look at, again, oh, how many stations you passed. Did you pass 18 out of 18? Or if someone passes 12 out of 18, both are pass in PLAB 2. So both are equivalent. So that's about PLAB 2 passing. And then finally, about the Royal College exams. Now, all the exams so far, which we discussed, were licensing exam. Basically, that's just to get licensed from the GMC, so they don't add to your qualification or they don't add to, furthering your progression in your career. It's just an exam we need to take to become equivalent to the UK graduates. Now, when it comes to the Royal College exams, what happens is even the UK graduates take the Royal College exam. So the UK graduates don't take the PLAB 1 and the PLAB 2, but the MRCPs and the Royal College exams, UK graduates as well. Now, the thing with this is this helps with your career progression. So I would suggest, let's say, if someone has a date August next year, and now it's July. So you have 1 year and it won't take you 1 year to prepare for PLAB 1. So what I would suggest in the meantime is you could do one of the Royal College exams. So basically, since if you're considering moving to UK, you will have to do these exams anyways. So if you know at what trajectory you're going, if you're going to medicine or if you're going to surgery, if you're quite sure by now, you could always give one of the Royal College exams in the meantime, and it will actually add to your because this will stay valid to like 6 or 7 years and you have to do them eventually anyways. So it's a really good idea to give one of these Royal College exams. So for emergency medicine, so those who are interested, you could give, MRCM, which is member of Royal College of Emergency Medicine. For surgery, MRCS. Similarly, I think for other specialities, you could go out there and you would probably find the Royal College exam for that, and you could give that. But I'll focus on medicine and surgery because these are the two most commonly chosen. So let's start with medicine. So MRCP, let's give you an idea what is MRCP. Now, remember what I was talking about? This one. Okay. So this is the foundation year, 2 years training. So when we are entering the UK system, we'll be entering somewhere in the foundation. So we'll become FY2s. And then what happens in the UK, once you go into IMT training, internal medicine training, let's say if you want to specialize in medicine, so within the first 3 years of residency of your IM training, you need to give MRCP UK exams anyways. So all the UK graduates and everyone would be giving their MRCPs during this time. But since you have time, the dates are far away, and if you can, if you do your exam right here in the foundation year, it will mean that definitely it will increase your job opportunities. And second, that's basically one less exam to give during your IM training. So you'll be free to do other things like research or whatever, but definitely that reduces your burden of doing, sitting and preparing for the exam. So I would highly recommend, if you have time and energy left, you could highly consider doing one of the MRCP exams during the foundation years. And then once you finish your MRCP UK, and then you go into higher specialty training, which means you would be specializing later into respiratory or whatever, and then you would do respective exams. But MRCP has to be done by everyone entering the intern. So before you exit your internal medicine residency, you have to finish all of the MRCP exams. Now let's see, what are these MRCP exams? How do you get? So once you finish all these MRCP exams, there's something called MRCP UK diploma. So you get a diploma, you become a member of the Royal College of Physicians of the UK. There's a whole graduation ceremony and everything. So once you finish all the parts, there are 3 parts, as I'll come in 2 minutes. Once you finish all 3 parts, you are, MRCP qualified physician. So you're MBBS, and then you could put next to your name MRCP UK. Now, let's talk about MRCP. Now, MRCP is basically divided into 3 exams. So there's part 1, there's part 2, and then there's PACES. Now, as you can see, part 1 and 2 are both written examinations. So again, similar to PLAB, you would have to shade MCQs. So there are just MCQs, you just have to prepare for them. Part 1 has 2 papers. It's just 1-day exam. So you would go in around, in the afternoon. So it starts at around 1. It lasts about 3 hours. So from 1 to 4, that would be paper 1. They'll give you around 2 hours of break. You will come back at around 5:30, and then you go until 8:30. So just within 1 day, you will finish both the written exams of part 1. And similarly for part 2, you will have the same scenario repeated. And the beauty of these MRCP part 1 and 2 is you could both do them here in Riyadh, so you don't have to travel anywhere or go and book your accommodation and flights. You could do part 1 and part 2 in Riyadh, because Riyadh is one of the international centers which is recognized to give MRCP UK exams. And then comes the time of PACES. So PACES is basically now, as you can see, a practical assessment of clinical examination skills. It's similar to PLAB 2, but a notch higher. So it's much difficult. So as you can imagine, so this is, at this level, PACES, they would be expecting you to, this exam they give when they finish their 3 years of IM training. So they would expect you to know, full-blown IM. They'll give you a patient, they will have, examination signs and stuff. So this will be much more hectic at this level, but at least you could do your part 1 and part 2 at this level very easily. If you prepare, if you know how to prepare, you can easily finish your part 1 and part 2 exam. For PACES, I would say now it's a bit too early, unless you're working already or you're in a service job or something, that's different. But if you don't have the clinical or the hospital experience yet, I would not rush to do the PACES, because remember, once you finish your part 1, you will have 7 years to finish all of the exams. So if you just do part 1 and 2 now, and then later when you come to UK and then you can do your PACES, it's fine. So that's the MRCP. And once you finish your PACES, you will finish the MRCP, and then you will get the diploma. As we mentioned, part 1 and 2 would be done in Riyadh. There's a center in King Saud University. And then PACES, You could do it in neighboring countries like Qatar, Kuwait, UAE, and Egypt. But the problem with this is, again, the seats, similar to PLAB 1 seats, wait time is really huge, because they would, prioritize those who did their part ones in 2015, because understandably their MRCP is going to expire if they don't sit for their paces. So those who are near expiry of their part one, they would prefer them first. And then if there are additional seats left, they would give you the seat. But again, the seats are difficult to find, especially, in the region. But anyways, paces, you shouldn't be concerned anyways, because we don't want to do it now anyways. We'll do it later when you're coming to the UK. So that's just a brief overview of how you should talk about MRCP. Okay, any questions so far? Let's see, no questions. Okay. Now let's talk about how to. Now remember, both were written papers. Again, I'm really a big fan of QBanks. People would tell you go read books, go read this. But personally, if you ask me if you did your QBanks nicely, I don't think you need to go to different resources. Okay, before that, let me show you the dates. So these are the dates for this year, as you can see. So it happens around 4 times a year. So if someone, let's say, wants to do in November, so there's an exam date on 30th November, and this is the application period, and this is the fees and everything. So this is for part one, and then similarly, you will have one for part two as well. Now, so you could see the dates are available all year round, and then you could choose whatever date you want. And second is the eligibility. Now, to become eligible, you need to have your now it's slightly different from PLABs. Remember, PLABs, you become eligible once you finish your 5th year. Here, you don't only become eligible once you finish 5th year, you become eligible once you finish your internship. So once you complete your internship, that's when you're eligible to sit. So let's say if you finish your internship this year, end of June, July. So if your date in August, you are eligible to sit for this August exam date, because you would have completed your internship end of June, end of July. You see what I mean? Similarly, you are eligible for 30th November. So basically, the end date of your internship should be before the exam date. So once that's done and you have your degree, you are eligible to sit for the exam. So that's about MRCP eligibility. And then once you sit for part one, you're automatically eligible for part two and PACES. So that's easier. So it's just to get into part one. As you can see, eligibility, I got you guys a screenshot. So candidates are required to have graduated at least 12 months prior, which basically means that you need to have 12 months of clinical experience, which is basically our internship. Okay, now again, I'll just give you a quick how to prepare. Again, it's a pass-fail exam. So you need to aim 65 to 70% to pass. And again, I would say is go try out sample questions first. There are around 200 questions on the website, and try it out. Maybe you would see how the level of the question are. If you're scoring already, 40 and 50, that's a really bright chance that if you study well and do the QBank for 2 to 3 months, you could bring that up easily to 60, 65 plus. And maybe you might find some of you who have done your USMLEs recently and stuff, you are already scoring 60, 65. So that's really good news. You could easily, crack on and do part one as soon as possible. There's a chat. Let's see. Okay. Assalamu alaikum. For example, if someone has a date of PLAB 1 in Feb. Yes, absolutely. So if you have PLAB 1 next year, Feb, I would highly recommend. What will happen is, let's see the dates again. Reach. Yes. So see, now if you have PLAB 2 in Feb, so you could easily target this. I assume you have completed your internship. If you have completed your internship before this date, so by 30th November, you could easily sit. So you would still have December, January, and Feb, which is around 3 months, which is more than enough time. And also keep in mind, once you prepare for this MRCP part 1, that would really take care of the medicine bit of PLAB 1 as well. So it will overlap. So the content you will be studying for this one or preparing for MRCP Part 1 will take care of the medicine subjects of your PLAB 1 as well. So that will reduce your preparation time. So once you're preparing for PLAB, you would focus on, surgical specialties, OB-GYN, peds, and other things, and medicine things would become really easy. So that's why, as I told you, if you have gap, if you have time, you should target this. And if you know you're going to medicine, because if you don't know, if you're not sure yet, or you're like, I want to go surgery or not, because remember, it's a very heavy fees to pay. So if you're sure that you don't want to go into any surgical specialty and you want to do medicine, then I would highly recommend you sitting for the Part 1 now and getting it out of the way. Yes, okay. Okay, I hope that answers the question. Now, how to actually prepare for this? Again, QBanks. So you have, for Part 1, ideally, I would recommend is past medicine. This is what I did as well. So past medicine has around 4,000 questions, and then you could do the math and calculate how long it will take you. Again, the questions are not that long, just similar to PLAB 1, maybe slightly longer. And maybe the options are slightly closer, but again, nothing really too complex. If you study well and if you can sit down for like good period of time, you can easily do Part 1 and just do the QBank, because QBanks will tell you what are the specific things they're asking, and you would see in the exam itself, they will repeat, or the concepts would repeat, and it won't look new. And again, remember, it's just a pass-fail exam anyways, so you don't have to score really high on the spectrum. As long as you pass, that's more than enough. Now, again, if for some reason you feel that past medicine is not enough, or you feel you're struggling with past medicine, you're not scoring well, there's an optional option of going into past test, which has a lot of questions, which I feel is too much for 7,000. But if you can maybe target your weak areas and do your specific subjects from this, maybe do like, let's say, cardiology or do respiratory from past test, and then focus on that. You could combine both QBanks, but for me, I would say past medicine. If you're scoring well, you could just stick with past medicine and pass the exam. And similarly, you have other QBanks like BMJ and others, which you can explore if you want. And then options, you have the options, and then there are free trials for each of these QBanks. So you could have a trial, maybe 1 or 2 days, and see how the QBank feels. And then you could choose the one you like. Okay, then for Part 2, similarly, there is a past medicine as well, but now for Part 2, I would recommend past test instead. It has more questions, and the questions in past test highly resembled the exam itself. The past medicine questions, I felt they were very little, so they were around 2,000. And secondly, the questions then were either too long or too, twisted, and they were not direct. So they were trying to, make it really hard and complex, which is not actually the case. I felt past tests reflected better the exam. So past test is the one I would go with. And you don't need to necessarily finish all 5,000. If you want, you could always, select the subjects you feel you're weak in. And maybe even if you do 3,000 to 4,000 questions and you feel comfortable, you could, if you're scoring 70, 75 plus, or even 80s, that's more than enough, and you'll be ready for the exams. And similarly, Part 2 also has sample questions. So you could try out sample questions and see where you stand, and then you could take it from there, and then you could decide on how long it will take you to prepare. So that's the one way I found really helpful on deciding how long, because once you read online, it's really subjective. So there are some people who are studying for Part 2 for 1 year, and then you don't know their situation. So some of them are working full time, they have kids, they have other responsibilities, and compared to someone else who's just, sitting at home, has nothing else to do, he can do it in maybe 1 to 2 months. So that's why it's really subjective. And maybe sometimes when you read online, you get scared, oh, this needs a lot of preparation, or people are preparing for 6 months and still failing, but you don't actually know their scenario and what they're going through or how long they have to study. So keep that in mind. As long as you're doing your QBanks, you're sticking with the score and sticking with the schedule and getting the desired score, I would say there's nothing to worry about. No need to even read, these experiences and all. You are on the right track, hopefully. Okay, and same thing goes when you go and read the UK experiences. Remember, I told you the UK graduates also give this exam, but remember they're working during their IM residency. So as you can imagine, their residence and residency is difficult. And then they take the time out of the residencies and, do slowly prepare and take maybe 4 or 5 months to prepare for these exams. But compared to someone who's just fresh out of medical school and he has time on his hand, he can easily sit down and hammer the questions and do it much more faster, even faster than the UK graduates. So that's the difference when you read the how long you need to prepare. So that's it, just QBanks and you should be good to go. And for PACES, as I told you, there are teaching courses and there are other things, but I would still highly not recommend anyone attending PACES now, because the failure rate is also really high. So some people, sometimes even the UK graduates need multiple attempts to pass. So it's not really easy to pass. But of course, if you're working in the hospital and if you have clinical experience, or if you come here in the UK, work for maybe 6 months to 1 year, then you can easily go. And if you feel confident, you can go and give the PACES exams. And remember, once you finish part 1, part 2, and PACES, that's when you get your MRCP diploma. So just based on 1 and 2, you don't get anything. It's still considered incomplete until you finish your PACES. That's when the MRCP diploma gets completed. And funny enough is that what happens is those who are, more senior and, are already in internal medicine training, is once they finish all 3 parts here in Saudi, they can directly apply for GMC registration, skipping the PLABs. So this is one of the routes to getting a GMC registration. So you don't have to do PLAB 1, PLAB 2 if you just finish all 3 of them. That's important. If you finish all 3 of them, you are eligible to get a GMC license to practice. So that's another route to keep in mind. So especially for those who are working here in service residency, maybe for 1 or 2 or 3 years, they can skip the PLABs and they can just do 1 and 2 and PACES and then get the GMC directly. Okay, let's see what else. I think that's it for MRCP. If you guys have any questions. I know I just gave you a brief overview. If you need more details and specific stuff, you can always email me or get my contact from the organizers and I'll be happy to help. Any questions? I'll just wait and see if there are any questions. Okay, I guess no questions. Now, similarly, what we discussed now was MRCP. Now, similarly, those who are keen to pursue a surgical specialty. Oh, wait, sorry, there's a chat. Yes, again, it depends, as I told you, as you can see how many questions. So there are around 4,000 questions. So if you can, let's say, do 50 to 60 questions and you could do the math, maybe some people can finish it in 2 months. Some people might need 4 months. Some people might need 6 months. So it depends on you, depends on how much time you have on your hands. Are you full-time free? Do you have any other commitments? So depending on that, it could be, the time would vary. And again, how would you know that time is, I would highly recommend to go and do the sample questions on the website and see where you stand. So you would know, let's say someone does sample question and he ends up scoring 30. Now, that guy needs a lot of time to get to 60, 65. Compare that to another person who does the sample question without sitting and he's already scoring, let's say 50, 55, and 60. So, that guy won't need enough of a push here. If he just solves few thousand questions, 2,000, 3,000, he can easily go above 65. So that's why the time would vary and it's really subjective for each individual. But I hope, that gives you a general idea of how long it should take to prep. Okay, no problems. You're welcome. Okay, so as we discussed for medicine, there is a similar route for surgical specialties. So those of you who are interested in pursuing a surgical specialty, there's something called MRCS, which is Member of Royal College of Surgeons. Now that only has 2 parts. Let's go to the next slide. Yes, so that only has 2 parts instead of 3. So there's just part A, which is just MCQ based questions, which is 1 day of MCQs. And then there's part B, which is the OSCE based examination. So you could, if you have free time, you could, at least sit for part A of the exam at this stage of your career. Similarly for OSCE, I would not recommend anyone jumping to OSCE unless, he's working and, he's in a clinical environment and he feels comfortable with clinical skills. But at least you could do your part A's by sitting down here. It's just basically similarly MCQ based, similar to part 1, and there are Q banks. The most common one I found, popular one, was MRCS Q bank, which has around 2,000 questions. If you can just do the questions and then if you read the explanations, I think you should be good to go. And again, it's a pass-fail exam similar to MRCP, so there's nothing to worry about. If you can score 60 to 70%, you can pass. And for part B, there are some courses available, and there are other things available, but personally, my advice would be not to jump and give part B quickly. At least get part A done and then worry about part B later once you gain more clinical experience and once you're more clinically sound. And part A happens in Jeddah, so that's good news. So you could stay within Saudi and go to Jeddah and do the part A exam. And for part B, you need to go abroad like PACES. You need to go to different neighboring countries and do the OSCE part of the exam. So same concept, Q bank, sit down, just solve the Q bank. If you have free time, just get it out of the way. Is that clear? Yes, I think that's all I had for the overview of membership exams. And similarly, you would find for ER, MRCEM, you could go online and you could find similarly information regarding that. So now this is just to give you an idea and let you know that there is an option you could do this. And now the possibilities are endless. And some people actually do both. Part A of surgery, they do part 1 of MRCP. So the options are now endless and depends on what you want to do and how you want to take it from here and how you want to make best use of your time. And please let me know if you have any questions. Thank you so much for attending today, and I hope you guys benefited, and I'm always available and happy to help.
Thank you so much for the informative presentation, Doctor. I'm sure everyone in the audience found it very beneficial. I'd also like to thank Ambos for their constant support. To everyone in the audience, thank you for joining us today, and our team hopes that you found this session as informative as we did. If you have any more questions, please feel free to put them in the chat now or to unmute and ask your questions. Also, for further updates on any events and webinars, do make sure to follow us on Instagram and Twitter to receive the latest updates. If you wish to contact us in the future, you can do so through our website or through our WhatsApp number, all of which have been provided in the chat. Thank you, Dr. Salik, again, and for everyone in the audience. We hope to see you in the future. Thank you. Have a wonderful day.